Today's topic is, I think on everybody's minds as far as, what are the trends and what's happening. So it'd be great to hear from the three of you. So first, as far as introductions, we have Monique Zytnik, who's award-winning global internal communications leader based in Berlin. And she's worked with numerous uh, multinationals like DHL, Lego Foundation. She's the author of the book on internal communications in the age of artificial intelligence. So it'd be great to hear how the book is going. And I believe it is a bestseller. Is that correct, Monique?
Okay. It is, it hit a couple of Amazon lists at
Okay,
some point last year. I think it was America and Australia,
super.
which is nice. Thank
Congratulations.
you. Thank you.
And and so Monique is also, of course, our IUBC Eminent Chair. And together we have two other co-hosts, which are or participants, Shel Holtz, SAMP, who's Director of Internal Comms for Webcore, an IBC Fellow, and then as well Neville Hobson, who's a strategic comms professional with 3 decades of experience. So really having an insight into the link between technology and organizational communication. So it'd be great to get both of your thoughts, and both of you are in fact co-hosts of the Immediate Release podcast, which I listen to regularly. So it's great to have you all on board. Um, so first and foremost, I just wanted to thank you all for coming. And so we have a really good group. I think we'll try to have discussions for the first 35, 40 minutes, and then have an open Q&A, if that's okay. So first, perhaps I'd like to have my first question to Monique, which is, in your book, you talk about, people come first and technology merely enables. So can you build on that and basically how that really aligns with the main challenges now and perhaps the misconceptions that people have about AI in internal communications?
Sure, and I'd first like to acknowledge all of the excellent internal comms and AI experts on the call here as well. So feel free to jump in and write in the chat your views as well, because it's where we share our knowledge and understanding that we all get better together. But in terms of your question about where people come first and technology merely enables, I think if we'd gone back a year ago to where I was standing a year ago when my book was launched, there was a lot of misconception about what AI was able to do and a lot of hype. I got the idea that it was going to be the solve all for everything. But fast forward to now, it's really become integrated in different parts of the working experience. And a lot of people don't even realize that they're using a little bit of AI here or a little bit of AI there. And some companies are really advanced. So one of my clients is just says, oh, you need DeepL Professional, go buy it, whatever you need, grab Canva, all of these tools. And there are some other organizations, other organizations that are still just only using Microsoft and Copilot and what's enabled in those tools. So in terms of internal communication, I think there was a misconception that AI would take our jobs, but I think the reality is that it complements our jobs, and we'll be finding that we're having more hybrid teams where AI is, or particularly AI agents, once they're up and running properly, will be taking on sort of more team member roles. But at the moment, there's a lot of bits and pieces and cobbling together different programs to try and get to the end result. So Google and Microsoft don't even talk properly. So there's still some kinks to iron out before we get there, but I think that's where we're sitting at the moment. The other thing, and apologies for my long answer, but the other thing I just wanted to point out is the misunderstanding that AI is large language models, and I see a lot of opportunity for other areas of generative AI and other types of AI to really boost the way that we do communication and internal communication.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think that organizations have been slow to adopt, and so it's a process. I think that everybody is adapting to, and to Shell, you've talked about sort of the now, I guess, the next phase, which is hybrid human AI teams, and how that can impact, the way that we work. So what do you see are the risks? And on one hand, what are the risks on one hand of some companies going too fast on this? And then what are the opportunities that as comms experts we need to sort of be aware of?
I think there are a lot of risks if this is not approached strategically. Among them is the fact that we won't be nurturing talent. I think Monique is right that we're not going to see a lot of layoffs in internal comms because of AI, but I do think that you're going to see a lot of these AI first organizations are going to be reluctant to bring on new people when AI can take on the kind of work that the organization, the comms organization, is looking for somebody to tackle. So if we're leaving this lower hanging fruit, the mundane tasks to AI, this is often the stuff that the entry level communicators are doing. So I'm concerned that we're not going to be nurturing young talent that will be able to move up and take our jobs when we move on. I also see a potential for over dependence on AI, starting to rely on it for the kinds of activities that really do require the human to be at the top of that chain. Another risk I see is producing a sea of sameness in content. This is something Chris Penn mentioned when people were all excited about the podcast capabilities that Notebook LM has. And he said, stop being excited about this because they all sound the same. Do you really want your podcasts to all sound like that? Those same two people talking in the same tone of voice. And I fear a lot of communications could end up, especially among the communicators and organizations who haven't really mastered the art of the prompt, to produce content that everybody looks at and goes, oh God, that's just AI, because you can tell. And one of the biggest risks, I think, is managers who are unprepared to manage hybrid teams. There is going to be a lot of change in the role of the manager, and this is not unique to the communications function. This is throughout business. Managers who are managing hybrid teams are going to have to rethink their entire processes, their entire workflows, and they're also going to have to really master soft skills, because you're going to have a lot of employees who are distressed, concerned, confused, that you're really going to have to hold their hands through this process, both in terms of the technology and in terms of their emotional reactions to it. So, those are just some of the risks. I think preparation, first of all, it's really driving 100% AI literacy among your communication staff. Establish that baseline of what everybody in the communication function needs to know, and make sure they know it and document it. I mean, you can even test it to make sure that everybody knows what they need to in order to be able to implement this and use it at a strategic level. We're going to have to train our managers. There's going to have to be manager-specific training to prepare managers to manage hybrid teams. But the big thing is to set the strategy first. Neville and I just recorded an episode of FIR yesterday. I'm hoping to post it today, but quoted the former chief decision scientist at Google saying, if you're not going to go strategic, don't go at all. Because if you're not aligning the kind of work you're doing with AI with measurable goals that are meaningful to the organization, then you have to question why you're doing it at all. And if you want this to succeed, if you want this to be effective, you have to start with the strategy.
I love that quote. I just wanted to say that, Shel.
I thought it was good too. Wasn't mine.
And that dovetails well into my question to Neville, who basically suggested that, PR companies, comms consultants, we should all be focusing on strategic advisory roles instead of basically, doing the commoditized execution work that can be done by AI. And I'm already seeing, I heard about a consultant who was hired to do a communication strategy. And part of that strategy was to implement an AI implementation bot that would basically implement the strategy. So she wasn't actually being hired for the strategy and implementation, but just for the strategy. So my question to Neville is, do you think this is going to become standard practice where we are just basically doing the top line strategy and then these agents are basically doing the implementation? How do you see this moving forward?
It's a good question, Nicholas. I think I do see it sort of like that, but not quite so black and white as that. I do definitely see AI taking a more of an execution role and we taking far more of a strategic role, in the sense of we don't roll up our shirt sleeves, but we know how to get things done with tools like generative AI, bots in particular. I've got a few other things I want to say on this, but before that, I just want to go back to what Monique said, that I agree. The people come first, technology merely enables. I'm not sure merely is the word there, Monique, but it's equally important. This is about people. It's not about the tech. And Shel mentioned the episode he and I recorded of FIR last night. I'm thinking back a couple of weeks to an episode we talked about, which you referenced, Shel, on managers managing hybrid teams of people and AIs. I think, and we touched on agentic AI very, very in passing, and I'm sure that'll feature again as we get into the discussion. But I think we're at a seriously important, significant milestone in the evolution of all of these things that we've just been mentioning, but how they are going to enable organizations to achieve their business goals through tools like this that communicators will manage. So part of your question I would answer, Nicholas, AI won't replace communicators at all, but it will define our role. And that's already changing, if only listening to what Shel's mentioned, what Monique has already said, and what I'm talking about too. So we move from managers to creators to enablers. We enable things. And I kind of summarize it in a sense by saying AI might run the play, but communicators will write the playbook. And that's our role. Our role isn't to run the play. That's the role of the AI with close supervision. So our roles shift, and they're already doing that in many ways. So I see that as being significant. The biggest shift isn't just about what we do, it's how do we do it? So how do we add the value? And I hear lots of people, and this is not new at all. I mean, this kind of weaves in and out of all of our jobs over the past decades. Where's the ROI? What's the return on all of this? And it's not financial necessarily, but it can be linked to. So AI handles execution. Consultants, i.e. communicators, lead on purpose, ethics, strategy, all those significant skills that we are good at. We're moving from project management to, what could I call it? Systems management, to borrow an IT term, training the AI that runs the projects. And that's a significant step change in what we're doing. And communicators, I believe, are uniquely positioned to take a lead in that kind of role. So the role evolves from executing to, what should we call it, framework design, I suppose, to enable that. The shift's already underway, and I think it will become the norm. That's to the basis of your question, Nicholas, earlier, rather than the exception. And we're on the road to that. When that will be, I've seen a couple of people saying it's going to be in 2027. Some say maybe 2030. I frankly have no idea. It could be. But we're on the way to that. And it's going to be, I think, a painful journey in many organizations who simply do not see this coming. So our job is to help them and to educate those organizations. And to go back briefly to the manager of the AI, of the hybrid team of people and AIs, that I can see that absolutely coming, and managers need help to do that. I would argue too, and this we talked about, Shel, in that episode, that the people need help to understand this is coming and this is what it means to you. You need to know how to work with an AI colleague. So, and it's not going to be. Don't visualize it as a humanoid thing sitting at a desk. This is a bit of software on a screen. So when you got your team meeting, some of you are in the room, the AIs are joining in remotely, and some others are joining in remotely too. And ideally, I suppose, we'll get to the point at some point where you won't realize who's the AI and who's not. They're just your team. Is that a good thing or not? To some people, it will be a great thing. To others, it will be very uncomfortable. There's a learning with all of this thing. We're not there yet. Certainly not, to qualify that, we're not there in the mass sense. We are there in experimental senses that are going on in individual organizations. And that's how I see this happening. It's not a sudden mass take-up, little by little. And we'll learn from all those experiences. So it's very uneven. And we got to take that into account in our thinking too, that the people we deal with, business partners, supply chain, whatever your business is, you're going to be encountering this too. So we've got a lot of helping people, a lot of trying to help people type of work coming ahead of us. So I don't know whether that rambling thing answered your question, Nicholas, but maybe we got there partly, perhaps at least.
No, I definitely, and it reminds me of last week a market-tunist, which I don't know if you know, the cartoonist.
Yeah, the cartoons. Yeah,
he did. Basically, it's someone having a Zoom call with all his team members, but they're all note takers. They're all AI note takers, and he's trying to have a conversation. Obviously, this is a trend that.
I did read an article the other day, actually, that in one company, I wish I could remember who it was, they banning the use of AI note takers in meetings. And I think that's a good thing, but maybe that's a separate discussion. But it's interesting, though, I think.
Yeah. And actually, taking a bit of a step back, I found a 2024 survey that was done by Slack last year, basically that said that only 43% of people in major corporations had received guidance on how to use AI tools at work. So this means that people were still like experimenting with ChatGPT, but there was no corporate guidance and there was no internal kind of standards or frameworks, or basically, a focus on, what is the benefit or what is the ROI and how can we maximize that on specific tasks. So is this still the case? So this is a year later. Do you think that this is still the case, that maybe 43% or maybe 50% still don't have strong AI guidelines internally? And if so, why? And then as well, what are some other things that you would advise organizations today that are looking to implement AI for their internal communications? Perhaps maybe we can start with Monique.
Sorry, what people are doing to could you repeat that one?
I think first it's looking at, is there guidance in organizations? Do you see that this is growing as far as corporate organizations having internal guidance on how to use AI? And second of all, if you are an organization today looking to start to implement AI in the company for internal communications, what would be the first steps? Basically, your first recommendations, your key recommendations to get that building block.
So a shout out to the Institute of Internal Communications, because they have already put together a guide for ethical AI use in internal comms. So I would hope that there would be guidance and guardrails that the internal communications team would put in place, just as we have our little checklist for sending out an email to make sure there aren't any typos in it and it's been appropriately checked, that we add in certain checks and balances as well into our processes to make sure that that things are as they should be, and that we don't have biases, we don't have things being copyrighted, that all of the legal components, including, for example, labeling things as AI, and I know, Shel, we've talked about this, labeling things as AI content, which is required by the AI Act in Europe, for example, that all of these relevant checks and balances are in place, and that we're not infringing on employees' privacy. So I am starting to see organisations that talk about having policies and best practice guidelines, and other organisations that already have it. So that's really interesting. And what I and in terms of implementing it, the way I see it is it's no different from implementing any other technology. You need to have a proper change communication plan. You need to bring the right people on board, have champions, make sure that it's not a top-down approach, and that you're catching people who are perhaps a little bit fearful or not so experienced. You need to infuse that sense of wonder and discovery. I find when I do a lot of training that just having a very simple activity that's meaningful to the person will help open their eyes. So, for example, okay, you want to look at target audiences. What information do you have? Let's put it into ChatGPT and see what personas come out. Do they match the personas that you have in mind? Is that realistic? And then what can we go back to do to change those prompts, or what information? So just using it in a really practical sense, and then having people who are responsible for tracking the progress of the implementation, and then doing your assessment. So I don't see it as any different from how you'd implement a new employee app, for example, but the possibilities and the outcomes and the results are obviously hugely different in terms of what the different tools can do for your organization. But I see it as the same process.
Mm-hmm. Great. And do you think that, as far as companies implementing an AI framework and AI guidance, do you see a lot of companies already doing that? Would you say that it's over 50% of companies that are now have AI guidelines for internal comms and external comms?
I can't give you a hard fact and figure on that.
Okay, but just
but
maybe your gut feeling.
A gut feeling is loose guidelines I've seen, but not super tight guidelines. But if anyone has any examples of very tight sort of company-wide guidelines, in addition to the Internal Comms Institute, I would love to hear.
Yeah, I don't know, Neville, Shel?
I've not heard specifics. Like Monique, I think it's going to be really difficult to nail down some hard numbers without some very impressive data to back up that assessment. But a kind of a gut feel that I have from what I observe, what I hear, and what I sometimes talk to people about, is that here we are in 2025, almost halfway through the year, and the implementation, or rather the use of, or the confidence level, let's say, of employees and organizations. This is a very general sense, because much depends on your industry, your company size, and a bunch of other factors. We've moved far beyond the picture we saw 2 or 3 years ago, where AI was seen as some kind of mystical thing, and you had lots of talk about you mustn't use this in an organization. That has changed radically. And I think one fact I do recall from a recent FIR episode you and I did, Shel, we actually had some metrics that talked about the sea change, the literal shift. It was focused on PR, but it talked about, 3 years ago, only 10% of organizations are doing this now. It's more like 80%. So I would say that's a good indicator of where this is going, that this is no longer seen as a fuzzy thing that a few people do, and you've got to control it, and you've got a list of you must not. It's 50 points on that list with hardly anything about you can, to the other way around now, because everyone is more aware. And it is quite clear that, again, sorry to keep referencing FIR, but the one we recorded last night that Shel's going to publish today, we had examples of people there. I'm holding you to that, Shel. Hold you to that. A lot of the people there was. We have examples of how people are getting ROI from all these things. So,
how about you?
Sorry
okay.
about that. I'll find who's.
So I think it is interesting. Can I just point out, by the way, there's a great question in the chat, Nicholas. I don't know whether you saw that from Claudia Vaccaroni. I thought that's a nice question. Would that fit into this bit of the conversation, or do you want to talk about that later?
Up to you. If it's a question that's relevant that you see that's relevant to what we're talking about, then of course. But
can I throw it out then? I thought it was a great question, Claudia. So it says, why is ChatGPT considered the de facto LLM, and other tools, Claude, Perplexity, Ucom, Gemini, etc., are less popular or known and used? It's a terrific question, I think. I use ChatGPT more than any other, and just speaking for myself, it's got terrific recognition. It's got high ease of use. It's definitely got first mover advantage in terms of general awareness of what a chatbot can do. And in spite of the hallucinations, in spite of all the downtime that it suffers from, it is, I think, one reason why it is considered, I'm not sure the de facto, but it's the one that's mentioned all the time. You read a mainstream media article about AI and it mentions ChatGPT whenever it mentions an example of a chatbot. So that awareness is pretty big. Even my grandkids have heard of ChatGPT. They don't know what it is, mind you. But I've mentioned it to them, and they knew what it is because they'd heard of it. Maybe they had something about it in school. I don't know. But so the others definitely are not as high in awareness. But, that's my unscientific view, informed by what I've seen and what I've heard. But I hope Claudia likes the answer. And now I expect one of you panelists, my fellow panelists, to debunk that idea immediately and come up with something else, perhaps.
Well,
So
I think,
I
I was going to say that, the most effective model is usually the one that's been released most recently. If you look at the benchmark sites, they'll show you. And, if Google comes out with a new model, it soars to the top of the benchmarks. I do find that they each have strengths. I pay for access to at least 4 of the LLMs, not to mention some of the other tools that are out there. If my wife knew how much I was spending every month on AI, she'd probably have a heart attack. I think, as I noted in the chat, I think, they have first mover advantage. ChatGPT is the one that exploded. It was the first of the Gen AI models to come out with a free public version that knocked everybody's socks off. If you'd been using Jasper or Writer before that, you probably anticipated that this was coming. To get back to the question, though, about the adoption in internal comms, Mark Dollins, North Star Communications, he does an annual survey on internal comms and AI. And the 2025 version, he asked, when do you expect to be using AI for employee communications? And 46% said between now and the next 6 months, 22% between 6 and 12 months, and 20% between a year and 2 years from now. And it seems, on first blush, when you look at those numbers, and I don't know what his sample size was, but he solicited participation over LinkedIn, among other channels. But what you have to keep in mind about those numbers is, even though it seems surprising with all the pressure and all the publicity and everybody saying, if you don't do this, you're going to fall behind, AI is still a technology. There was a paper, it was released just a couple of weeks ago. I will share a link to it in the chat. This was published by the Knight First First Amendment Institute. It's written by a couple of AI researchers. And basically what they said is it takes nothing away from the transformative nature of AI to say that it's just normal technology, in that it's going to follow the normal technology adoption curve. There were other transformative technologies in our history, the steam engine, for example, that weren't adopted overnight. Some of these things took decades to take root. And that's not because the technology isn't of value, it's because people tend to be slow to adopt new technologies. Some of them are being deliberate, some of them are being circumspect, some of them are being skeptical. But the idea that everybody's just going to suddenly develop a strategy and the way business is conducted is going to change, in a heartbeat, it just doesn't make sense, really. And yeah, Monique, you're right. The Gartner hype cycle is instructive here. So is Jeffrey Moore's model. If you've ever read Crossing the Chasm, going from early adopters to late adopters to widespread adoption, and what that chasm is like between the early adopters and the late adopters. So it's going to take some time. I do think that those organizations that embrace it are going to have an advantage. But the idea that you're going to see, I just heard Sam Altman the other day say that he envisions the day when you're going to have $1 billion company run by one person. There's only going to be one person in the organization managing a bunch of AI employees and agents. That may be true, but it's not next week. This is going to take a while.
If I can jump off the large language model discussion and go back to the essence of it, of some being better than others, and I agree with you absolutely, Shel. Some are better than others for different things, and I think it's important to go back and think about how they're trained. So I'm not sure if everyone on the call is aware of how they're trained, but quite often it's a human who puts in a prompt into a system and has to create a false or wrong answer from one of several models, and then that they're compared with each other, and then that data is taken away and the models improved based on where the failings are. And having access to the different models is also really interesting, because some of them clearly are more better with certain localized content. Other models are better at summarizing. All of them, particularly the last version of ChatGPT, have a bit of a problem with telling us what we want to hear and being a bit, I think the last model was rolled back, wasn't it, Shel? Because it was psychopathic.
Sycophantic, yes.
Sycophantic, can't even pronounce the word. So basically it was being so absurdly complimentary that it became kind of distressing for people. And I think from here, this is an opportunity for us as well, because we as communication practitioners then can take that role of asking the hard questions and not telling our leaders what they want to hear, and offering what these large language models aren't good at. And they can be okay at it if you ask it to challenge you, but most people are quite happy to be told what they want to hear. So, but yeah, I think it's important to just go back to how the large language models are trained and how it develops, and remind ourselves, I think some of them are only actually 26% accurate in terms of the testing. So, and that's considered good.
And if we, I guess for the people attending today, if we look at basically sort of the practical uses, if tomorrow basically someone for their internal comms, they want to start to really make some inroads in their internal comms. I heard one person saying that they should basically look at what is the low-hanging fruits, what are some key ways in which AI can be then implemented or institutionalized into certain basically very rudimentary tasks, and that are very repetitive, and then to implement that within the internal comms. Uh, would you agree with that, Monique? And do you think what would be some I guess practical steps that people can take away from this webinar so that tomorrow they can really rethink their internal comms for using AI?
I always go with a strategy of, can I use AI for this? Like, what am I trying to do? Can I get AI to do it? And I predominantly personally use large language models a lot because a lot of my work at the moment is to do with writing. But I also use it, Neville, and I was going to mention this before, to give me strategy ideas. Again, using large language models. There are other elements that I would like to be using in terms of data analysis, and other aspects that sort of language translation plugged into intranets, ways that we can use generative AI more broadly to offer micro nudges. So offer people hyper personalized content. But practical tips is just really to start with looking, what is your daily job and can I use AI for this? I have to do an FAQ for journalists. Can I train my ChatGPT buddy on the tone of voice and all of the information and content in previous media releases? Can I put the questions in and get an initial draft? Saves me plenty of time, plenty of brain power. Can I create my personas with this? Can I get it to put an Excel spreadsheet with all of the top journalists or likely publications for these particular personas? It's whatever you think that you might need to do. Just ask ChatGPT to do it for you and see what happens. I think would be my recommendation as a practical tip.
Great. And Shel, Neville, would you have any other tips that you can add? I mean, I know that, for example, I'm using Claude with the project side and basically using Claude for specific things so that it's these repeatable things that I do. And so these projects have already my tone of voice. They already have a lot of content and it allows me to be much more agile in that way. But what would be some of your examples there?
Well, as the leader of a communications department and spending, I would say, probably 80% of my time on internal, what I have found most valuable is to inventory our processes and our workflows, and to go through each one and identify where the opportunity for using AI exists. The low-hanging fruit is definitely the repetitive tasks, the mundane tasks. But there's so much more: audience analysis, sentiment analysis, strategic planning. I mean, the reason that I pay $200 a month for the pro version of ChatGPT is because of the number of deep research sessions that I run. If I have a question, if I'm researching something, why am I going to settle for what I learn on one Google link when I can get a thoroughly researched report, and I can read that report? I can also dump that report into Notebook LM and ask it questions as I'm working on my strategic plan for whatever it may be. I'm doing this right now. We're introducing a new internal communications platform, and to develop the marketing plan to get employees to embrace this, particularly the engagement component of it, the communities that we're going to ask people to participate in. I'm doing research on what has worked when rolling out this kind of thing before, and building the results that I'm getting from these deep research sessions into my plan. So, it's really a question of looking through all of your processes and identifying not just what can save you time, but what can add real value to the results that you're delivering on behalf of the organization.
Yeah, that's good. I've got a different perspective as a consultant, not working for one company. And I'm not doing a great deal of this. And that's part of how I run my life these days, where I focus more on life than work. I'm lucky enough to do that now. So I'm about to start something quite interesting, which is to help a company as the kind of support voice on what they have planned with regard to how their corporate communications function uses generative AI in a very, very broad sense. I'm focusing on one particular part of that. And that is actually reflective of some of the conversations I've had over the past 6 months or so. Recently, I ran a workshop for a tech company, a half-day workshop for their senior communicators that was designed to, on the face of it, to educate them on what AI could do for them in their roles. But in reality, which was, I'm glad we actually got to this, it was more about their current understanding and how they saw it in a year to 2 years' time. Given the industry they're in, the changes that are going on, and they've just, in fact, not long after we ran the workshop, they had a restructuring that saw some of those people leaving. So this is a fluid environment that you need to bring in some clarity for and comfort to people who are trying to understand these things in a changing environment. So if I were doing what Shel was doing, for instance, what you said, Shel, actually makes total sense. But I think the first mistake I see often in implementing AI, particularly within inside the organization, and this usually comes from senior management, I think, but not always, is the belief that this is plug and play, as it were, that you take ChatGPT and kazam, that's it. Your problems are over. And I think go back to what I said at the beginning, AI might run the play, but communicators got to write the playbook. And indeed, looking at the chat, the question there from actually from Kevin Ruck, who asked a point on could AI write the playbook and the play? To which I responded, a little tongue in cheek, and you probably saw that, Kevin. Yes, with the right prompts, which Monique agreed with that. Thank you, Monique. But could it do this better than a comms person? Kevin asked. That's a very good question, to which my response was a zillion caveats with the answer to that. But broadly, I would say, yeah, absolutely. But you got to add the humanity to its output. And something that I'm drawing from those experiences I mentioned to you over the past 6 months or so, and the one coming up, is the thing I see frequently is that the lack of realization in many people who kind of little light bulbs going off, and they can say, wow, I can do this with this ChatGPT or whatever. But the lack of real serious realization that that's the start point of your role now. You've got to check everything. And you mentioned, Monique, the latest version of ChatGPT that was sycophantic and it was withdrawn. I noticed some of that too, but only in the context of, and I'm wondering if I hope this is more common, but in the context of verifying everything it had told me on a particular thing. And it's something I knew about myself even, but I checked every single link. I checked the sources. I checked everything, including its delightfully supportive and praising tone in some of the things it was telling me. Now, I must admit, I've noticed that quite a bit with ChatGPT, and I've told it to stop doing that. Because you can actually train your own bot in that sense to know a bit about you, your preferences, and so forth. One of them is, lighten up on this psychophancy, if you like. Although I didn't use that term because I hadn't seen that report I had before. So to me, it's also why picking the bot is important. I mean, Nicholas, you mentioned that you use a wide spread of them depending on what you want to do. I tend not to. I stick with ChatGPT for most things. But one thing I do sometimes is have Gemini, in particular Gemini, check what ChatGPT has done. And that's a kind of a luxury thing, but depends what I'm doing though. That's the thing. I use these tools myself more than anything else, probably 90% research as opposed to creating. It's the research. ChatGPT is brilliant at summarizing lengthy PDF reports or articles or whatever. But you've got to be careful because, as I've discovered early on, if you give it a URL to go and do something, it'll come back with stuff and it's made up. Then it tells you, oh, no, I can't access a URL like that. So I just pulled generic information. And I've got a great a response from ChatGPT from about 6 months ago, which I think I'm going to print it out and frame it. It offered an abject apology for lying. And it told me it shouldn't have done that. And it should have told me at the beginning that it couldn't do what I'd asked. And it was very sorry. And he won't ever do it again, which it did the following week. So you've got to really pay attention to these things. So this kind of digressed a bit from what the original point was, which I forgot, I'm sorry to say. But this is great. And I think Kevin was a really good question that Kevin asked. It's a serious question that gets to my point about you are the owner of this. You are the one who will decide whether what you've got is doable, usable, not just execute. And I still have encountered people, even as recently as just the other day, who talk about this thing that the chatbot did that they've then gone and used it literally as is. Did you read it? No, I didn't need to. Oh my God, nothing but disaster is about to befall that company, I think. So, and I wonder how many people are doing that. Hence the point about training, hence the point about education, awareness raising. And I think getting back to Nicholas's question really was, how do you start? And to me, and this won't surprise you all at all, it starts with education. You do that before you do anything else almost. I've had this conversation with others who violently disagree with that viewpoint. I would own up to that. I think it's important. You've got to have people with a level of understanding of what they're going to be using before they go out there and start using it. So that's the communicator's role, particularly in internal communication. I think that's absolutely key. So. My 50 cents
I can
worth,
throw.
yeah.
I can give you just a very quick practical example of what Neville was talking about. I have sort of identified the content that we produce here that just needs to be good enough. And in our industry, there's a lot of content that only needs to be good enough. So if I have done a couple of interviews, I'll throw those interviews into whichever LLM I choose. If I'm looking for it to be a little more creative, I might go for Claude. If I'm looking for it to be technical, I might go to Google. But wherever I go, I'll say, write a draft of an article on this. And the prompt is more detailed. It talks about what the audience is and what the objective of the article is and what the key point I want people to walk away from the article is. Then I'll paste in my interview notes, and that becomes the draft that I am going to edit. And I use the word edit lightly. It's pretty heavy, but getting that first draft, and what I find is what I end up with is probably what I would have written anyway. It just saves me that much time. And by the way, one of the things that I do every time I ask it to write for me, which is something I used to resist, I send it to my blog to get a sense of my writing style. I said, read my blog. Here's the link before you write anything. And of course, if I'm using ChatGPT, it remembers that now. It really does save me a lot of time, but it still sounds like me because it still is me. The way I crafted the prompt is me, and the hour that I'll commit to revising and enhancing and editing is also me. It turns out to be a very human piece, but in a third of the time that it used to take me.
Great time saver.
Yeah. Monique, so I think it's interesting in the context of your book to look at what are the long-term trends here. So what are your points of view as far as where this is all going?
So the big discussions that I'm hearing, so I facilitate an internal comms group, and I've been doing webinars and a series of things. The big question at the moment is, with all of these changes and extra tools and us being able to be seen to be more productive, like where is our value add? And I touched on that slightly in terms of being the one to challenge our leaders and ask the difficult questions, But I think we need to be clear on, and it also touches on what you were saying, Shel, about what should we be training our team members for the future. And I really think there's three key, yeah, 2 or 3 key things. One is shifting from the content producers to the experience curator. I think that's where, if we start to think instead of content marketing, I think content marketing is very 2000s. And I think, or 2000s and 20s. And I think in the future, it'll be more about the experience. So being the one to curate the in-office experience, so people want to come into the office and have the right conversations and connect on a human level as needed, or curating the online experience so that it engages with you and it goes beyond just pushing content in different directions. Then the second element is the relationship building and the stakeholder management. So I know these large language models are great at chatbots, and very early were shown to be great for like therapy bots and the rest in terms of building artificial relationships. But I think from a stakeholder management point of view and understanding the nuances and how to get a project through and how to get the right support and how to, as I said, ask those difficult questions is going to be a really big skill. And then the third element, which I don't think I was quite that aware of how important it is about a year ago, but it's become very evident to me, is understanding how comfortable people are actually with the transparency of us using these tools. Like, it's this whole discussion around, was it written by AI or is there a human behind it? How comfortable are you using in those chatbots for this particular audience? So being conscious of the tech, not only the age, demographics, location, everything to do with your target audience, but also their comfort with technology and where that sits. And then I think that extra element of being able to use AI for hyper-personalization. So I think that's where we haven't got to yet, is that hyper-personalization and reducing the clutter just by being super targeted in our messaging, in our channels, in our formats, down to the individual level.
Super, thank you. I think that's really helpful. And we have one last question actually from Claudia Vaccaroni, who talks about Gen Z and basically the Gen Alpha. And I think it's interesting if any of you have, any new, interns or people coming on board, how are they using it and what is their perception? So I think it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see how that perception changes as well, as they grow in the marketplace. Do you think that that's sort of an important thing that we should keep in mind?
Certainly. As with any new generation coming into the workplace, it's important to understand what their influences are, what their perceptions are, what their expectations are. And AI is definitely part of that mix. They're growing up with it, a lot of them. So you think about the people who grew up digital. Neville and I are certainly of an age where we were introduced to this well after we had begun our careers. But people who are coming into the workforce now have been using this for 3 years already. A lot of them. So always important to pay attention to generational differences as the newest generation finds its way into the marketplace.
I think I'd add to that the kind of hand up, yes, but caution. It worries me a lot, I have to say. Here in the UK, we've had political argument for a long time on online safety, and there's indeed a law passed in the past few months, Online Safety Act, that puts the onus of responsibility on the tech social media platforms largely to to prevent stuff that you don't want your kids to see. I think that's almost an impossibility to do that, the way it's all structured. This still needs a lot to do. But in the meantime, as Claudia's question is really telling us quite clearly, Gen Alpha's growing up with all of this. Gen Z are already gaining confidence. Gen Alpha, think about my 2 grandkids and the fact that they're aware of some of this. They don't have mobile phones. They're too young. And I think their parents made the right decision. I've not interfered in any of that. But I equally have friends whose kids of 6, 7 do have mobile devices. And you can actually have safeguards and so forth. I don't think you should rely on that. Kids are kids. They find ways around all of these things. We know that. We were kids once, right? So that, though, is a huge part of the question that we need to build in as communicators, thinking about when people come into our workplace. And this is where education is key to this. To raise awareness of the pros and cons, including the risks. And again, I'm not suggesting, I've got these 10 answers now, we could do that. This requires more discussion. And it's something I see missing in some of the, not all, and I won't say this is a minority or a majority by any means, but some missing is this very topic on new people coming into the workplace, particularly younger generations. I'd love to know examples of how companies in particular, it doesn't have to be companies, it could be any type of organization, are addressing this in their workplaces of young people. Let's say, work experience, as we call it here in the UK, intern type people who come in temporarily. What about contractors who are, to all intents and purposes, as far as anyone else knows, part of the company? They are in that sense. So how do you bring all this together to safeguard people and make them feel comfortable, and you sleep at night as well? Because look at what's happening publicly in this past 3 weeks here in the UK. Marks & Spencer, big retailer, 3 weeks later, they are still offline with just about everything you can do online. No online shopping, no contactless, none of that, no click and collect, nothing, through a cyber attack by a hacker group. 3 weeks on, they still haven't resolved this. And other retail companies in the 2 other big ones in the UK, Harrods, the big department store, the cooperative retail supermarket chain, are also being hit. So that's going on. Awareness is raising of the bad things you can do with this. And again, I've probably taken the lid off Pandora's box with this topic, because it's a bit outside the frame of what we're talking about today, but it's part of the landscape. Yeah. So awareness raising and safeguarding are key things that we haven't nailed yet, in my view.
And as also as someone who lives in Portugal and just had his electricity completely turned off last week, we didn't have access to any electricity, any ChatGPT. So I think we all have to learn as well, how to deal.
Yeah,
that's the thing. This new generation as well, for them to still be creative and still think and still be, really not so dependent always on technology. So we do have a few people that have left already. So I do want to call the meeting. But I would like to perhaps I've put in here, I don't know if this is the right link, Monique, for more information for people to find out more about your book on internal comms. Let me know if this is the right link, but otherwise please feel free. And as well, Neville and Shel, are there any links that you'd like to add, perhaps your podcast or?
Yeah, I'll throw in the link to FIR for those who haven't seen it or heard it.
Yep, I'll just do a quick link to my website, which I've stuck in the, I'll stick it in the chat.
Super. Great.
I have to just quickly say it's my favorite tech comms podcast
thank
of all
you.
time. All time.
Oh, we got a recording of that, Monique. Can we use that?
Of course.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Yeah, this has been great. Enjoyed this a lot. So nice to chat with everyone and great questions. Introductory discussion. Maybe we do this again sometime.
Yeah.
Sounds great.
We could go on and on for hours.
We could.
And see you in Vancouver, except for Neville.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
Definitely see you, Monique. Looking forward to it.
Great. Thank you very much, guys, for everyone. Much
Thank you.
appreciated.
Bye-bye.
Okie dokie. Bye-bye. Thanks.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.